So after much hype and fanfare, AEW World Champion Kenny Omega returned to Impact Wrestling last night on Impact Wrestling's episode on AXS TV. Now, of course, Omega had a plethora of things to talk about alongside the Invisible Hand himself, Don Callis, heading into the title versus title match at Impact Rebellion against Rich Swann. It's going to be the AEW World Champion Kenny Omega versus the Impact World Champion Rich Swann. Title versus title, both the AEW World Championship and the Impact World Championship will be on the line. So this was Omega's first appearance on Impact Wrestling in several months, and actually Kenny Omega's first appearance inside the Impact Zone, inside of an Impact Wrestling ring on an episode of Impact Wrestling on AXS TV. Previously, his only appearance inside of an Impact Wrestling ring took place at Hard to Kill in January, so certainly a very significant moment last night to have Kenny Omega appear on the show. So before Omega and Callis even made their appearance on Impact Wrestling, the Good Brothers, the former Impact World Tag Team Champions, were looking backstage for Omega and the Invisible Hand. They couldn't find him. They were knocking on Omega's door but had no answer. They didn't realize that Omega and Callis were already headed to the ring. So, in the following segment, Don Callis and Kenny Omega made their way to the ring. Don Callis informed Kenny Omega that he spoke with the unified Impact World Champion Rich Swann last week and mentioned how Swann can have a great life and comeback story, but he will never surpass Kenny Omega's overall in-ring accomplishments. Callis said that not one person had ever kicked out of the one-winged angel finisher. Kenny Omega reiterated this fact and said that Callis is correct. We'll touch on that in a second because that's certainly an interesting talking point to say the least. In Omega's eyes, he said that he's better than any past or present world champion. Don Callis then referenced a ton of famous world champions and current world champions. Again, we'll touch on that in a second because Don Callis said that he's better than Hackenschmidt, better than Gotch, better than Thez, better than Flair, bigger than Hogan, bigger than Moxley, and bigger than Ibushi. After Kenny Omega referenced Ibushi once again, he sounded very bitter when he said that as well. Don Callis then surprised Kenny Omega by creating a vignette that highlighted Kenny Omega's greatest one-winged angel spots in AEW. After watching it, Omega warned Rich Swann that after Rebellion, he will be a footnote in Impact Wrestling history. Omega wanted everyone to know on the Impact Wrestling roster and around the world that unless he's dead, no one will ever take his AAA Mega Championship, his AEW World Championship, and even the Impact World Championships off him, and that ended the segment. So it was certainly a very interesting segment. I think I've said a few people criticize it, shall we say, for maybe being a bit long-winded, and I would say that's probably a fair criticism. It lasted 12 minutes, the promo itself. If you haven't seen it, Impact Wrestling have actually posted it in its entirety on YouTube, so you can go and see it there. It was a bit long-winded. I think that's probably a fair criticism there. There's a lot to break down because of that. And again, I know this is probably ironic, me calling it long-winded. Sometimes I can go on a bit of a tangent when I talk here on the channel. It's just passion. It's passion talking about professional wrestling and Impact Wrestling. Nevertheless, let's break it down bit by bit as to what happened in the segment and actually what happened before the segment. So, as I mentioned, to start it off, the Good Brothers were knocking on the door of Kenny Omega and Don Callis, and they weren't there. And I thought there was a couple of ways you could read into that, frankly. I think the storyline purpose and the way they were trying to tease it on commentary, certainly Matt Striker and D'Lo Brown were teasing it as the Good Brothers being paranoid that after losing the Impact World Tag Team Champions, perhaps Omega and Don Callis wanted nothing to do with the Good Brothers, and by all accounts, maybe the Good Brothers were feeling a bit paranoid that they had let down or disappointed their former Bullet Club leader and stablemates, that kind of stuff. Maybe that is slightly accurate in terms of the storyline. I looked at it as a different way, though. I looked at it as maybe they're kind of trying to play on the reports that have gone around of people questioning, is Kenny Omega really going to be involved in this build to Rebellion, in this title versus title match with Rich Swann? Is he actually going to show up on Impact Wrestling? Is he actually going to appear inside of an Impact Wrestling ring? Because he hasn't done that previously on episodes of Impact on AXS TV. They've only done stuff on the tour bus and stuff backstage and stuff that they actually filmed in Jacksonville, but they dressed it up to appear that they were actually outside of the Impact Zone in Nashville, Tennessee. But I don't know if that was kind of a play on that. I think it's probably more driven towards the storyline of the Good Brothers feeling a bit inadequate, that they're no longer the Impact World Tag Team Champions. That was certainly fun. And there was a couple of times during this segment as well that I think sometimes it's worth taking a step back and reminding yourself of what you're actually seeing unfold in front of your eyes, because it's just wild, isn't it? It's just absolutely wild that I had to kind of pinch myself on a couple of occasions when I'm watching this promo, watching this segment, because I'm saying to myself, and you can see the picture there, That's the AEW World Champion, Kenny Omega, holding an AEW World Championship bout. They showed footage from AEW, and he's in an Impact Wrestling ring whilst he's under contract to AEW. It's just such a unique storyline. It's such a unique working relationship, and they really played this up during the segment, talking about how the title versus title match was historic. Matt Striker referenced a couple of instances in the past where there have been these title versus title matches and the unification match, and D'Lo Brown kind of said it best, that in the day and age when it's very difficult to do first time evers, it really does feel big, and it is historic, and I think it's sometimes a little bit lost on everyone recently on how big of a match this is. It really is historic. You don't see this very often, if ever, so it certainly is just wild. You sometimes have to sort of, as I mentioned, take a step back and say, we are looking at something very historic. Whether it's executed perfectly or not, we don't know, but it certainly is a really historic moment. I did want to point out as well, we haven't got the picture here, but I did want to point out Kenny Omega's shoes was something else. If you haven't watched Impact Wrestling and you haven't watched the segment, just go and watch it for the image of the shoes. I wish I'd have grabbed the screen grab of it. They were insane. They were fantastic. And it did feel like a very loose segment. I felt that Don Callis' promo was certainly very thought out and he was pretty sure what he was going to say, whether it was bullet points or he had the lines he wanted to get in, or certainly the phrases he wanted to get in during the segment. But there was certainly a lot of improvisation, I think, going on in there. There was certainly, it just had a very loose feel to it. There was definitely a lot of off-the-cuff comments, particularly from Kenny Omega. So I wouldn't say it was definitely not the WWE scripted promo that we're used to. There were definitely parts where they were completely off the script or completely improvising it all, and certainly at the very least working on bullet points. But that kind of stuff really resonates with me as a fan, because if the performers on screen, if the wrestlers, the managers, whoever's talking, whoever's doing anything on screen, if they're having a good time, as a fan you feel that. You feel that they're having a good time, and it makes you feel like you're having a good time watching it. And that's something that I definitely felt like watching it. As I mentioned, there were definitely elements of it that were long-winded, and I felt they could have tightened it up. But, you know, you have to balance it out. You know, if you tighten it up, you probably script a lot more of it, and then it doesn't feel as loose and it doesn't feel as real. So I think there's certainly a balancing act there. But it was certainly very... well, it said loose and off the cuff. One thing that was certainly very loose was, as I mentioned, Kenny Omega had a ton of comments here that were definitely not part of the script or anything like that. So Don Callis is talking about anything to ensure the legacy of Kenny Omega, and he talks about he will suck every drop of blood and talent out of Impact Wrestling. And then Kenny Omega, and honestly, this is true. Go back and watch it if you haven't watched it. Start screaming, "Suck 'em, Don! Suck 'em and chuck 'em," which is, you know, that is definitely a PG. You couldn't say that on WWE television. I don't even know if he could say that on TNT. I know he was saying some wild stuff with Don Callis a couple of weeks ago that got some people talking. But when Omega said that, when he started just randomly shouting "Suck 'em," he had to turn his head away from the camera, because obviously they're doing the promo looking into the hard camera like this. And as Omega's just screaming this, he turns around to the hard camera, because I think he was this close to breaking. I think he was this close to busting out laughing. But again, that translates to a viewer. That translates to whoever's watching, because that's funny and that's entertaining. And look, when you watch pro wrestling, I think the majority of people, yes, it's a suspension of disbelief, and you want to be emotionally invested in what you're watching, and you want to be engrossed in what you're watching, but ultimately you know you're watching a television program. It's no different to when you go to the movies, back before the world went crazy, but it's no different when you're watching a movie or a drama or a comedy or whatever. You know you're watching a television program. You know you're watching a film. You know it's not real. You know that those events aren't really happening. When I'm watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I know that Anthony Mackie doesn't have wings and is beating up George St. Pierre on a plane, right? I know that's not actually happening, but you get emotionally invested in their suspension of disbelief. And when you see someone having a great time, when you see someone laughing and all that kind of stuff, it makes the viewing experience much, much more enjoyable. And I enjoyed it. I thought that was great. So Omega was just saying stuff and interrupting Callis' promo, which again, Callis looked like, I mean, to some people that would probably throw them off. I think Callis just looked like he loved it. He loved just being and sharing the ring with Kenny Omega. That was a lot of fun. But getting back to the storyline element of it, they definitely continued the one-winged angel build. That's the whole thing that's been going on in this storyline so far. Obviously, there isn't too much you really need to add to this story, is there? Frankly, you know, it's title versus title. It's AEW World Championship versus Impact World Championship. There isn't a ton there that you need to add in, really, is there? There isn't a ton that you need to go, okay, we've got to add this in, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. There isn't a ton you need to add in. I mean, it's historic as it is, so you don't need to do that much, frankly. So there isn't really much that you need to add in there. So I think it's smart just to center the rest of the story around the one-winged angel. I think that's smart, and I think that makes sense. So they continue this one-winged angel build. They talk about how he hit Rich Swann with it before at Hard to Kill, and Swann wasn't able to kick out and all of that great stuff. But then what's I think really got the people talking the most here, certainly on social media, was when these Ibushi references started coming up. So Don Callis says, nobody's ever kicked out the one-winged angel, ever. And Kenny Omega agrees. He goes, no, nobody's kicked out of it ever. Not one person. And obviously everyone then just goes, wow, of course one person has, and that's Kota Ibushi, who is currently the IWGP Heavyweight Champion for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And it leads a lot of people to say, well, if they're saying that nobody's kicked out, this opens the door, the forbidden door, I suppose, to having Kota Ibushi at some point have another match with Kenny Omega. Now, what would that be? Where would that be? Which company would that be for? Would that be for Impact Wrestling? Would that be for AEW? We don't know. We don't know. But that was a subtle Ibushi reference because they didn't name him. They didn't drop a Kota Ibushi reference. They just said, well, no one's kicked out of it. And the fans themselves have to then do the logic of say, well, someone has kicked out of it. That's Kota Ibushi, that kind of stuff. But it got much less subtle because then, as I mentioned, Don Callis is saying that Kenny Omega is the biggest star. He's a god of professional wrestling. He's bigger than Hackenschmidt, bigger than Gotch, bigger than Thez, bigger than Flair, bigger than Hogan, bigger than Moxley. Kenny Omega screaming, carry on, continue. And then Kenny Omega says, bigger than Ibushi. And Don Callis sort of turns to him and goes, bigger than Ibushi. And once again, the subtle reference was saying that nobody's kicked out the one-winged angel because, of course, Ibushi has. That wasn't subtle. That was definitely, it felt like a seed definitely being planted. And a couple of Ibushi references. We've heard these rumors and these reports talking about a New Japan Pro Wrestling relationship with, obviously with Impact Wrestling, possibly with AEW as well. Obviously, Kenta made an appearance for AEW, and obviously John Moxley still the IWGP United States Heavyweight Champion. So there's definitely an element there to have a match or have more New Japan Pro Wrestling influences and appearances on the show. What will that consist of? I don't know. But it certainly feels like we're heading towards another Kenny Omega versus Kota Ibushi match. Now, where would that be? What promotion? At this point, I don't know. I really don't know. The fact that a lot of these Ibushi references have really, frankly, been on Impact Wrestling, it could lead one to believe that the relationship is stronger between Impact Wrestling and New Japan right now, that maybe, just maybe, we're going to get Kota Ibushi versus Kenny Omega in Impact Wrestling. And if that's the case, I mean, that's ginormous. That's huge for Impact Wrestling. That would be, I mean, talk about Rich Swann versus Kenny Omega being one of the biggest matches that Impact Wrestling's certainly done in its recent history, potentially ever. I know that's a big statement, but Ibushi and Omega, that'd be right up there. That would be, again, that'd be massive. That'd be massive for Impact Wrestling, so that's a possibility. So as I mentioned, they then put together a one-winged angel vignette and video package, heavily focusing on the finisher. Will Rich Swann kick out of that rebellion? I think that's the storyline. That's the big storyline point heading into it. As I mentioned, it's all focused and centered around the one-winged angel, hasn't it? And we discussed this briefly last time. Will Rich Swann kick out? Will he be able to kick out? That's the big discussion point. The fact that they've focused on it so much, I said before that I didn't think he would, considering that only one person's ever done it before, but the fact that they're pushing it so hard, one person's only ever kicked out and nobody, well, they're saying themselves that nobody's kicked out, but in reality only one person's ever kicked out, it's leading me to believe that the inevitable thing is that Kenny Omega's going to hit it, and the big spot at the pay-per-view is that Kenny Omega hits it and Rich Swann manages to kick out. I think he then picks him up, does another one and wins. I think that's probably the likely outcome, because it protects everyone involved, right? Impact Wrestling want to protect ultimately the star that is under contract to the company, because Kenny Omega's not under contract to the company. I think ultimately that's what they want to do. So I think that's probably the most likely situation, the most likely scenario there, that Rich Swann does kick out, manages to defy the odds and kick out, but then Omega hits another one and he wins the Impact World Championship. I really enjoyed the line that Kenny Omega said when he said that when I debuted in Impact Wrestling, it was the greatest day of the promotion's life. For me, it was just Tuesday. I thought that was fantastic. And then he talks about adding 2 championships to his collection at Impact Rebellion. And that's the whole point of this, isn't it? The whole point is that the first appearance Kenny Omega made in Impact Wrestling, he said, I'm a collector of bouts. He was the AEW World Champion. He was the AAA Mega Champion. And he spoke about collecting, or adding to his collection, the Impact World Championship. And I think Impact have upped that, because not only would he add the Impact World title, but he'd also add the TNA World Heavyweight Championship too. And I think that's the big storyline. That's the big storyline, and that's the big picture they're looking for. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great. And I mentioned before, I think Kenny Omega is going to win the match. I know a lot of people said, oh, it's going to be a double disqualification, or it's going to be a no contest. I don't see that. I think that finish alienates fans that have invested in the product and invested in this match. I think it's too big to do a non-finish or anything like that. I think if they do that, it's got a huge chance of alienating fans to never watch Impact Wrestling again. They might have just won these fans back for the first time, and I think if they do a non-finish, I think the fans will be really frustrated by that. So I don't see them doing that at all. So I think Omega wins. This is my prediction at the start of the year. I think Omega wins, and I think it eventually leads to a future match at Slammiversary, which he will then lose the Impact World Championship to. Who that is against, I don't know. I don't know if that will be Rich Swann. That could be a variety of people. That could be Ace Austin. That could be Chris Bay. It could be Rich Swann. There is a lot of people it could be. So that's my prediction. And look, they finished the promo by saying this is history, and they're not wrong. They're not wrong. This is history. It's a massive moment for Impact Wrestling. It's a massive match. It's the biggest match they can do in this Impact Wrestling and AEW crossover. Champion versus champion, title for title. They can't do any bigger. And as I mentioned, the promo, was it long-winded? Yes, I did think it was long-winded in parts, and it could have been shorter, which is rich from me, as I said, but I thought it was good. And look, Kenny Omega being on Impact Wrestling is a big win every single week. So I thought it was very good, and I obviously very much enjoyed the Kota Ibushi references. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Kenny Omega's return to Impact Wrestling last night and his promo ahead of Impact Rebellion in April? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below, all opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.